have been called a transphobe more times than I can even count at this point. And I wanted to kind of go backwards in time and explain, first of all, that I'm not a transphobe, and second of all, how easy it's become to call someone like me transphobic, and why language is being used to manipulate our public policy and dialogue to make it easy to call someone like me a transphobe. Gender dysphoria is a mental health issue. It is a delusional belief that someone has when they feel like they were born the wrong gender. Transgenderism, it's confusing to me how come the T is even in the LGB. Because unlike sexuality, gender is a way of expressing oneself. So to suggest that somebody has a gender that is in the wrong body is to suggest that there is actually a correct way of being male and female. I always thought the whole goal was to break down gender stereotypes so that it was okay for women to have masculine characteristics and for men to have feminine characteristics. But now the trans movement is saying that someone's gender identity can be in the wrong body, which means that somehow there is a gender identity that is male and a gender identity that is female. So there can be a disconnect between the male and female. So it's no longer a mental health issue. It's no longer delusional thinking. It's no longer like someone who has OCD who feels like they have to wash their hands all the time to get the germs off, or someone who's anorexic who feels like she shouldn't eat because she's too big. So what is a mental health issue has now become someone has been born into the wrong body, and that there is such a thing as a female gender and such a thing as a male gender, which means it's possible for a male gender to be in a female body and a female gender to be in a male body. Okay, so when I start saying that gender dysphoria is a mental health issue and that one of the ways of resolving gender dysphoria is to transition, I get called a transphobe. And it's not because I'm actually transphobic, which I'm not. I'm actually very compassionate to people who have gender dysphoria and are unable to manage it and need to transition in order to find peace. I'm very compassionate and supportive of people. What I'm concerned about is that something that is a mental health issue has now been convoluted because of the language, so that we are led to believe that a man can be born into a woman's body and vice versa. So we start having weird language like boys can have penises and girls can have vaginas, which is just wrong. That's a lie. Girls don't have penises, boys don't have vaginas. People are not born into the wrong body. Gender dysphoria is a mental health issue. It's a mental health issue that can be managed in a number of different ways, one of which is transitioning. There are lots of other ways to manage gender dysphoria, and one of them is to go to a therapist and learn techniques for managing dysphoria. But because I suggest that, I'm transphobic, because I don't believe that a man can be born into a woman's body and a woman can be born into a man's body. So now there's legislation coming along that allows people to actually change the sex on their birth certificate. So sex, they say, is assigned. It is not. Sex is recorded at birth. When a child is born, a birth certificate records their sex, their date of birth, and their time of birth, as well as some other information. Sex is not assigned, sex is recorded. Laws that allow people to retroactively change their sex at birth mean that cosmetic changes to the body, elective cosmetic changes to the body, or behavioral changes confer a sex change to an individual. If we think about that a little bit, it's concerning because it means that there is a way of being male and a way of being female. And some people are lucky enough to have the male identity and the male body match, and some people aren't. This is really convoluted thinking. We went from a mental health issue to suddenly this contrived way of thinking that is actually really damaging for women and men, for boys and girls, because it suggests that there is a female way of being and there is a male way of being, and that our sex at birth is not what dictates who we are. It is our way of being. So all those stereotypes that we've tried to manage and mitigate and challenge are now being embraced full on by the trans movement, because a boy who has feminine characteristics is now a girl trapped in a boy's body rather than a male with feminine characteristics. So as someone who had gender dysphoria as a child, it was actually called gender identity disorder when I was a kid, I know what it feels like to believe I am another gender. I know it is a mental health issue. And it's heartbreaking when somebody has this kind of dysphoria to the point that they have to transition. People who have this kind of mental health issue should be supported, should be provided accommodations. But it's because it's a mental health issue. Because if trans activists are correct, then pretty much anybody can say, I'm actually a man in a woman's body. So I'm actually a woman in a man's body. If that's correct, then there is no need for trans protections whatsoever, because there's no way to tell if somebody is the gender that their sex suggests that they are. So all of us are basically able to be transgender, gender binary, gender fluid, right? Which means that gender, gender is not a fixed thing, which means that you cannot have a man in a woman's body. The fact that I say things like this means, according to them, that I'm transphobe. So we go from me saying that gender dysphoria is a mental health issue. People who have gender dysphoria that is so significant that they have to transition need accommodations, to me being a transphobe, because I don't believe that a man can be born into a woman's body and vice versa. And a man who's born into a woman's body just has to say, I'm a woman in a man's body, or I'm a man in a woman's body, and therefore we should say, oh, okay, therefore you are a man, therefore you are a woman. If anybody can claim to be anything that they want to be, and we have to accept that not as a mental illness, but as a fact, then we should just get rid of all of the protections that we have for marginalized groups. Because someone like Elizabeth Warren can say she's Native American, and we don't question it, because that's her identity. Just as a man can say he's a woman, and we can't question it, because that's his identity. We're promoting the acceptance of the most extreme treatment for gender dysphoria rather than trying less invasive treatments. We're suggesting that children should transition rather than access mental health treatment. We're basically saying that we're giving up on all these other ways of treating gender dysphoria, and we're going to go to the most extreme treatment. So at what point do we look at actual facts, such as the sex of a child at birth? It's not assigned, it's recorded. At what point do we say, just because somebody has cosmetic changes made to their body, they're allowed to say that they are something that they're not? At what point do we say children don't get to have access to mental health services if they're transgender? Because they actually are transgendered. They actually are stuck in the wrong body. What we're doing is we're actually accepting dysfunction. So dysfunctional people are promoting dysfunction.